Hi, I'm really excited to see this many people in the room for a talk that's just about plants. There are not going to be any animals here. It's all plants. Thank y'all for coming out. As Joanna said, my job title, what I do around here is I take care of the Habitat Gardens. So if you're familiar with this place, you know that the Habitat Gardens are plant collections meant to represent the plant communities of the mountains, the coastal plain, the Piedmont, sandhills of the southeastern U.S. So most of the time, when I'm thinking about plant combinations, it's like what actually grows with what in the real world. So I don't spend a lot of time thinking what looks good together in a horticultural setting. So this was kind of fun to think about this and get me a little bit outside of my habitat box. The idea actually came out, our magazine, the Conservation Gardener magazine, a few years back, we did an issue that was focused on horticulture, and the Hort staff contributed a lot of the material. And at the outset, we were asked to think about plant combinations that we liked. And I guess I just sort of got enthusiastic about the idea as a result of that and have continued doing it. So. This talk is going to be, so if you're a gardener, hopefully you'll get some good ideas for your own garden. It's all southeastern native plants, mostly perennials, so wildflowers, celebrating the wildflower of the year, year of the wildflower, sorry. And if you're not a gardener, what it is a chronological growing season in the garden focused on some of my favorite plant combinations. So you can either just enjoy the pretty pictures or get inspired to come back at the right time to see something that particularly catches your eye. So with no further ado, I'll see how I do with the technology here. Yes. Okay, so I hope you like that slide. It's the one I'm going to start with, or that picture. One of the things I want to talk about is, don't get me wrong, well, okay, I think actually most of the things that I'm going to say over the course of the next 40-ish minutes are going to be in direct contradiction with something else that I say at some point in the talk, so get ready for that. The first thing I'll say is the Hort staff at the Botanical Garden are excellent gardeners, and we do a really good job of picking the best possible plant combinations all the time. But also, a lot of times what happens is complete random chance. So I did, in fact, plant the Indian paintbrush in this bed. This is up at the top of the Piedmont habitat, and what I like to call the rusty metal junk bed. You could perhaps call it the vintage agricultural implements bed or the rusty metal junk bed. So I planted the Indian paintbrush in there. The Indian paintbrush is the red-orange flower in this picture. It is a biennial. It grows in sort of Piedmont prairie type situations, so full blazing sun and enough disturbance that the seeds can fall to the ground and make a new plant, which will spend a year as a basil rosette and then flower. It likes, soil that's on the moister side, so that it has in common with the foam flower. But the full blazing sun, when you think about, if you've seen foam flower growing, you see it growing in the woods, in a shady spot, rich, moist soils. I never would have said, oh yeah, this is going to be a great combination. I mean, even intellectually, if I was thinking about it, I wouldn't have picked fluffy white with pointy red orange. But the foam flower inserted itself into this bed, and because it is a Piedmont plant, I thought, well, why not? Let's let it go. And then one year this happened, actually it was last spring, this happened, and it was just so great. So, I have since then made a commitment to keep this going for as long as I possibly can. So the points here being, in spite of your best intentions, some of the most amazing things that happen in the garden happen, without your best intentions. So, to embrace it, go from there. Okay, more orange flowers, right? We've got just such a tiny handful of orange flowers in our flora, and my first 3 slides are orange flowers. So this is a little tricky to see. I'm going to try the laser pointer here. So this in the back is butterfly weed. This is behind the Totten Center, near the carnivorous plants. That pot with the butterfly weed in it is a low ceramic pot that's got drainage holes. It's filled with plants. They've been in there for a long time. It's very root bound and doesn't hold hardly any water. And it's just fine because butterfly weed, it's tough enough to take that in the full sun. It really wants the full sun. The orange milkwort, which is growing in the front here in the yellow pot with the pitcher plants, also likes full sun. But in the real world, where you find that growing is with pitcher plants. So it likes constant moisture. So constant moisture, acidic, low nutrient soil. Definitely not the sort of place you're going to find butterfly weed growing, or this is not a combination that would be easy to create in the garden. And of course I did not. This is once again random chance. So the butterfly weed had been there for a long time. We just moved the carnivorous plant pots last year when they bloomed together. I was like, oh my God, this is so much fun. So that is also a thing that I will commit to keeping going. And also, to go back to the foam flower and then Indian paintbrush, just because you don't know that they're going to do well together doesn't mean that they won't. Plants in horticulture often act differently than plants in the real world, or in nature, I should say, instead of keep saying the real world. A lot of things that we expect to grow in shade can tolerate more sun as long as there's more moisture. I can't envision a situation in which these two would work together unless they were in pots, but something else interesting to think about. So one more thing I would like to draw attention to, sort of in this vein of combinations. Mostly what I'm going to be talking about and what you think about with combinations is like what's going to bloom together and look excellent together. This is what's going to happen at different times. So this time of the year, if you walk down into the mountain habitat, you will find trout lilies and spring beauties and bloodroot. I know there's windflower out along the gazebo path and out in front of the education center. So our very first spring wildflowers are blooming. And it's really good to have these plants in your garden because they provide nectar and pollen for the very earliest pollinators that fly. So, I tend to, when I'm doing a talk, it tends to have sort of a biodiversity focus, so I'm going to thread some of that in here. But the earliest spring plants, the latest fall plants are more valuable to insects, especially pollinators, than all the stuff that happens in the middle, because there's plenty of flowers happening in the middle. So it's really good if you have the opportunity to go ahead and grow some of these things. Now, some of our spring ephemerals actually hold their place in the landscape, like the bloodroot and the trillium, which is the bottom two pictures. They more or less, their foliage will stay in the landscape much later in the season. The trout lily and spring beauty, which are the two top right pictures, will go completely dormant and disappear as the trees leaf out and the canopy closes. So if you have them in your garden, then you've got a blank spot. What do you want to do with that blank spot? They work really well with deciduous ferns. So things like the maidenhair ferns, like lady fern, broad beech fern, they'll come up and take that space and be neat. They've got the same kind of growing conditions as the spring ephemerals, and then they'll be dormant when it's time for the spring ephemerals to be active again. So that's another sort of way to think about plant combinations. And that was my ways to think about plant combinations introduction, and now I'm going to get into it. So when we were all sitting around, the Hort staff sitting around thinking about what are our favorite native plant combinations to put forward for this issue of Conservation Gardener, I think we all came up with this one. So as Joanna said, I've been here for 20 years, and I don't think that there has been one of those years where this columbine, phlox, golden ragwort combo down in the mountain habitat at the very beginning of the spring hasn't just been oh my God. One of the things that's pretty excellent about this is that it happens early enough so that we're not used to seeing all those colors in the garden. We're not jaded by the abundance of late spring yet. This is just the beginning of it. So These three plants have in common that they do well in moister, shadier spots, and they bloom wonderfully in the spring. All those colors, I think, go really nicely together. The columbine and the phlox have a little bit broader tolerances. The thing about the golden ragwort is that it really needs a moister soil to keep going. So I'm going to give you some other options to get this same color combination early in the spring. This here is, so that first picture was taken down in the mountain habitat where it's shady and moist. This picture is taken out in front of the education center, right up at the drop-off. And it's a misty morning in this picture, but it is full sun, lots of sun. So in this picture, we still have the columbine for our red. The columbine is a really nice plant to think about if you're thinking about combinations because it's got a long bloom time. So it is, I would characterize it as a short-lived perennial. The plants themselves don't live for a really long time, but it is a good reseeder. So you just want to let those, if you're looking to have more of it or keep it going, you want to make sure you let it go to seed in the garden before you cut it back. And that long bloom time allows it to combine with a lot of other things. So the Sundrops is the yellow in here. And that, as opposed to the Pachyra, is real tolerant of full sun, and it's also tolerant of drier sites as well. And then the hybrid wild indigo, you can see it sort of right in the middle, and off to the left is one of the NCBG hybrid Baptisia introductions. It's one of Rob Gardner's. And it's a little bit more, I think, delicate, a little bit less robust in a good way. Not that robust is bad, but less robust in a good way than some of the other Baptisia cultivars. So another thing that you think about when you're thinking about perennial combinations is sort of the scale of the plants. So the Baptisia is a little bit bigger than the columbine and the Sundrops, but at this stage of the game, not so big that it's going to overwhelm them. So Baptisias are herbaceous perennials and not shrubs. They do die back to the ground and come back up in the spring, but they bloom. When they bloom, they're not like in their full foliage. So they bloom a little bit early in the season. So you've got like a nice flower to foliage ratio, but then as the season goes on, they keep making leaves and branches and they keep growing. So they sort of hold their space in a bed as if they were a shrub until the end of the season, and they fall over and tumble around like tumbleweeds. But so you want to, if you're thinking about using Baptisias, just plan for that. So it's a little bit bigger scale in the long term than these perennials, but not so big that it's going to swallow their space. Okay, another sunny version. So the columbine and the phlox can both tolerate a little bit more sun if they've got more moisture. And then if that golden ragwort was too wet for your site, you can try golden Alexanders. Golden Alexanders these are all early spring perennials. It's the yellow in the middle. It is in the parsley family, so one of the larval host plants for the black swallowtail. It's really fun to see the caterpillars eating up the plants for this reason. It's not a bad idea to have a lot of it because it will support more butterflies, but it's also one of those things that if it's really happy and it seeds in a lot, you can't just pull it. You've got to dig it to get rid of it. So while a few weeks back, Heather was doing her Wildflower of the Year, maybe more than a few weeks back, but she did a lunchbox talk on the Wildflower of the Year, and she was talking about this, and Mike Kuntz in the conservation department was sitting next to me, and he says, well, I grow Zizia in dry shade, which I wouldn't have thought to try, but he says it's excellent in dry shade and doesn't seed in at all. So other thoughts about golden Alexanders. All good plants. Oh, and yet still more red and yellow. Okay, so in all of these red, yellow, purple combinations, the red has been the columbine, which is a soft red with yellow. And the columbine and the Sundrops work in a way that I personally, and when you're thinking, we all see colors differently. We all enjoy different color combinations. I think that the fire pink Sundrops combination is the worst thing ever. And I like both of those plants so much, it's really hard for me to like dig it up and say, you can't be here. This is fire pink spot. You've got to go, Sundrops. So a way that I have discovered through random chance, because Venus's Looking Glass is a weed around here, but it's a nice weed with like purple flowers. So if you've got Venus's Looking Glass in the mix with the fire pink and the Sundrops, I can tolerate it. Otherwise definitely not. So maybe your combination doesn't work, but there is a way to make it work. Okay, so here is the Columbine again, proving that it's a good combiner. So this is taken out here on the top deck, up here in the sun. The other plant in this picture is mountain phlox. So in the same way that I'm a little bit surprised that the foam flower is so good out in the sun in the Piedmont habitat, here's a mountain plant that early in the landscaping efforts around these buildings, we happen to have a lot of it. So we planted it out here around the buildings, and it turned out to be excellent, amazing. This picture sort of makes it look a little bit bluer than it is, but it's a pretty hot pink, which is not really necessarily my thing, but one of the things about this plant that I think is so wonderful is that the flowers are sort of all different shades of hot pink. So it's not like one plant is a different color than another plant. Within each plant, there's a lot of variation in the shade of pink. So some of them are very light, pale. Some of them are a lot warmer and brighter, with everything in between. So it's always really interesting to look at. So this is, out here in the full sun, sort of average to moist. And the Columbine is working well with that. And this is one of those things, like while I was trying to put this talk together, I was looking through my slides, like, okay, it's not just enough that it be a really good combination. I have to have a good picture to put up so I can talk about it. And this is one of those things that's not in my spaces, so I'm not seeing it and taking pictures of it all the time. It's out here in what was Mixon spaces, and it's now Becca's spaces. And yet I have pictures of this from year in, year out. Some of them had that big sculpture in it when the sculpture was still here. Some of you guys will remember. So anyway, this is one that just has impressed me for a long time. And here is that phlox again with Coreopsis. I think in real life it doesn't look quite as, I'm going to say, awful as it does in this picture. In real life, it is a really bold and colorful combination. Somehow this picture sort of brings out the worst of it, which, yet again, we all have different takes on what's a good color combination. But this lobed tick seed is one that I'm going to have in a bunch more slides now. This is a nice one because in addition to having these abundant and lovely sort of orange-yellow flowers, it's also a nice ground cover. It has, its foliage is good looking sort of in the off season. So it's still looking good this time of year, and sort of in the late fall it will pick up, and so you've got fall through winter into early spring. After it blooms, the foliage winds up looking pretty ratty, but at that point you're in the midst of the growing season, so you don't really need it to look that good. So it just makes a nice ground cover and another good combiner. So here it is again with our Sundrops again, and we're adding now green and gold. So that's this little guy in the bottom right. That's our green and gold there, which is another really excellent ground cover. One of the arguments that can be made for native plants, among being really important for all the insects and other critters, is that they are really good problem solvers. So if you've got a tough spot in the garden, there are very frequently very good solutions for the native plants that live here anyway. So the green and gold is a really good ground cover. It's also one of those things that kind of never stops blooming. So its big show will be a little bit later this spring, but if you walk around the garden now, you won't have any trouble finding one that's blooming. You wouldn't have had any trouble finding one that was blooming 2 months ago. So they never really stop. They're always going and giving you a little bit something. And I just think that these three colors are really nice together. To come back to my theme of you've got to embrace chance sometimes, there are two other species in this picture. I can't tell you which dicanthelium this is, but these little fluffy seed heads up at the top are one of the witch grasses. And then these little 5-leaved things that are all through is the potentilla, the dwarf cinquefoil, which is a little ground cover. So both of these guys came in on their own and just mix with those, and I think that's really nice too. These are both native plants that are common around here. They might show up for you as a weed, or you could find it, you could plant rescue dicanthelium and bring it in. Same thing with the potentilla. So, you're sort of focused on the showier, bright yellow blooms. The potentilla actually does have a little yellow flower, but sometimes it's these other little extras that were unexpected that really tie the whole thing together. And this here, I'm adding now the Piedmont Barber's buttons, which is the white in that bottom right. You can see it a little bit more in the top slide. That top slide will sort of give you a hint as to where these pictures were taken. This is up at the top of the Piedmont habitat. But the Barber's buttons are of a similar scale with all those other yellows. They're small, they bloom in spring, they look really nice together. So if you want to add a little bit more, 3 shades of yellow isn't enough, you can throw a little white in there. In the background of the picture where you see how did I get that far? Where you see the Marshallia here, this tall yellow in the background is the Small's ragwort. So the golden ragwort that we saw with the columbine and the phlox in the mountain habitat is an early blooming, wet-sided ragwort, whereas this one is a little bit later. We're getting a little bit later in the season now. And it's taller and sunny and, a little bit weedy. It's an aster, and the seeds fly around and establish elsewhere, but I think pleasantly weedy. So if you're looking for a bigger, fluffier yellow, there's another one for you. Okay. Here's another one that got high marks from the Hort staff in terms of what are the best combinations that we have around here. So it's our Coreopsis again, and now we're adding the lyre-leaf sage. The lyre-leaf sage is another really good ground cover. It's got nice basal foliage that ranges from green to purple to red. And these pretty blue flowers. Now personally, when I see a whole bunch of Salvia lyrata growing together, it looks weedy to me. Maybe that's my fault and not the Salvia's fault, but I think seeing it with the Coreopsis auriculata makes it all of a sudden super horticultural and wonderful. And it's, it's just one of those things that will do a lot of work for you in the landscape. And it's, interesting for a while after the flowers are done because it's got interesting as the seeds develop. So I think these two, and it's also sort of nice, I think it works as a front and center. I think this picture was actually taken right up on the drop-off, right in front of the building. But it's also nice as something that you see sort of in the distance, like an edge or a meadowy thing. So a nice combination. Here it is again with a little bit of that Indian paintbrush thrown in there. And the salvia is also really nice with the green and gold. So I think it, in my opinion, it helps a lot it helps to have something else in there with it. But the salvia and the green and golds together is one of those good sunny ground cover combos. Shady ground cover combos. People always like to say, what can I plant to replace my English ivy or my vinca? So here I'm talking about native plants being problem solvers. They don't solve that problem, but I don't think English ivy or vinca really do either. But what I like to say is that a combination of things together, so a combination of natives will help will help to hold space in the way that vinca and English ivy do. So there's the dwarf crested iris. Out in a sunnier spot, it will be sort of denser, and that's a really good sort of erosion control ground cover. It's happy on a steep slope, but in the shade, a little bit less dense, but lovely. It goes nicely with the foam flower. The woodland stonecrop, the sedum there, is another one that struggles in the sun but is real happy in the shade, and a little bit of a moister spot. And then the pussy toes on the bottom left there is tolerant of the sun and of the shade. It has sort of fluffy white flowers, but I think in terms of like why it's a good landscape plant, it's that very dense ground covery foliage. So some other plant combination ground covers for shade. Okay, we're back out here in the sun now. This is on the top deck, right outside, and we're getting a little bit later in the season. The plants have had more time to grow. They're getting a little taller, so our scale has gotten a little bit coarser. We're in the 3.5 foot range here. And everything about wild quinine is coarse. The flowers are not super fun to look at up close. You sort of enjoy them as like a mass. The foliage is actually the definition of coarse. And it is one of these things that will spread vegetatively, like not aggressive or bad, but it will, one clump, if it's happy enough, will over time become a larger clump, which I think is an excellent thing because it has a long bloom season, and the more of it you have, the longer it's going to bloom for you. It's a really good pollinator plant. All kinds of different things like to use it. I think the reason that I like it so much with the Baptisia, so this is a different Baptisia, this is albescens, which has white flowers, is the contrast between the foliage of the Baptisia albescens, which is kind of glaucous, sort of a blue-green, and even though the plant itself is substantial, the texture on it is a lot more delicate. So that delicate blue-green foliage, and those are the developing seed pods that you see sticking up there, which are also even paler than the foliage. It's just so nice to me with the columbine, and I spent a lot of time trying to take a good picture of this, and I'm going to show you a few more that are not any better than this, which is disappointing because it was such a really nice combination. One thing that I'd like to say about the Baptisia is, for the last few years around here, we have on occasion had trouble with a pest called the Genista moth, which is a native moth, a native caterpillar, but the caterpillar feeds in big groups, and it has on occasion defoliated our Baptisia. So I'm sure something eats them and gets some benefit out of that, but not nearly enough of them. So, smashing is an option. If you are too late for that, if you cut the Baptisia back early enough in the growing season, they tend to flush back out anyway. So it's not going to kill the plants. So one of those things that we tolerate in the name of biodiversity. So more pictures of the same combination. This maybe will give you a better sense of where this is taken. And here's a close-up of the Parthenium flowers. You can see the pollinators that like them. There's a little skipper, a little bee, all kinds of stuff. It's nice that they've got that long bloom time too, so more insects get to make use. And then here's a picture of the Baptisia in flower, so you can see those nice white flowers. It's a really nice looking plant while it's in bloom too. We don't just enjoy it for the seeds and the foliage. The flowers are pretty cool too. So this again is full sun. These two plants are more drought tolerant than most of the things that I've talked about so far. Okay, rattlesnake master is, I think, maybe a plant that I never do a talk without including, which is funny because it did take me a minute to come around to it. But this time of year, right, it's so quiet in the garden, but if you go out there and look around where there is rattlesnake master, you'll see the foliage coming up, and it's like this really fun, pale, greeny blue, and the reason it's called Eryngium yuccifolium is because the foliage looks like yucca foliage, And so it's, like kind of popping up like a funny little pineapple in the landscape. And as the season goes on, the leaves will get longer, and then these great white flowers that are perfectly round, spiky white flowers will emerge. And this is another one that just attracts all the crazy different pollinators. Like anything you can imagine, you're going to find on the Eryngium. It's the best spot for bug watching in the garden. Also, it is really great for winter interest. So we got that snow last week, which was a very heavy, wet snow, and smashed everything down. But you can still find some good-looking rattlesnake master out in the Piedmont habitat. And if it doesn't get hit with that, with heavy, wet snow, you can enjoy it through the whole winter until you feel compelled to do something about it in the spring. In the background of that first rattlesnake master picture is the hoary skullcap. A bunch of these things were former North Carolina wildflowers of the year, and the reason that the hoary skullcap, well, one of the reasons that the hoary skullcap made the cut was because it bloomed forever. It was another one of these things that when we started doing the landscaping around the education center, we had that and tried it out there, and it just never stopped. It just bloomed forever. So that makes it a great pollinator plant. It's also really attractive in the garden. It's another one of these things that as the seeds start to develop, the seeds are interesting, so it's fun to check that out as well. Sort of the same size and scale as the rattlesnake master. And then in the background there is another coreopsis, the threadleaf coreopsis. So tinier, yellower flowers than the first coreopsis I talked about, more of them, and the foliage on this one is very fine textured and feathery. So it's a really nice contrast with sort of the heavy boldness of the rattlesnake master, and then the hoary skullcap splits the difference, and then you've got this really fine feathery coreopsis. So I like that one a lot too. Okay, back in the Piedmont habitat, everybody loves cardinal flower. The best combination for a cardinal flower is a hummingbird. It is another one of these sort of short-lived or finicky perennials, so it doesn't tolerate crowding or having its basal rosette covered up off-season. So if you can grow a bigger patch of it, you've got a better chance of it persisting because they'll keep seeding in and making more. So if you lose your originals, you'll have another set coming along. I really like it with the downy lobelia. A lot of red is a good thing, but a lot of red with a little purple is a little more interesting than just a lot of red. The downy lobelia is clearly taller, with purpley flowers. The flowers themselves are a little bit smaller, but it's just a nice looking plant. It's not the most dazzling plant on its own, but really nice in combination. You can also do this combination with great blue lobelia, which is probably one that's more common. If you went to southern states, you'd probably be more likely to find the great blue than you would the downy, but I'm always irritated and dissatisfied by the foliage of the great blue lobelia. It does have big, dramatic flowers, but the foliage is always a little bit like, eh. So I'm pushing for downy, but do syphilitica if you've got to. That was full sun and a little bit wetter sighted. Okay, so that was into the summer, and now we're getting to late summer into fall. These pictures were taken in the perennial border behind the Totten Center. To once more reference Heather's Wildflower of the Year talk, she said that when she grows swamp sunflower, she likes to cut it back to the ground to keep it into a reasonable size. So in a smaller garden, if you want to keep it small, you can cut this thing back. If you leave it to its own devices, 6, 7, 8 feet tall, which makes it work well with the white flowers in there are seashore mallow. So we are probably most familiar with the pink-flowered seashore mallow, although I'm pretty sure that we grow the white one out here too. But the white one blooms a little bit later than the pink one. It is also big like the swamp sunflower, and the nice thing about a nice thing about the white-flowered one is that late bloom makes it go really nicely with the swamp sunflower and the aromatic aster. So as I mentioned it's important to plant things that will have nectar and pollen for pollinators at the beginning of the growing season. This aromatic aster is a real good one at the end of the growing season. It is a super floriferous, sort of tough and easy to grow, larger scale aster. It gets to be maybe 3.5 feet, but it will make a really big solid patch, a very solid flowery patch that works well with these other two. And then the picture on the left there is the mountain witch alder, which will be blooming soon. It's got white bottlebrush kind of flowers in the spring, but one of the nice things about it, so it's a, I don't know, maybe a 6 to 8 foot shrub, maybe 4-ish feet across, or a little bit wider, maybe a lot wider. But not super giant. Nice scale to go with these other guys. I think that the fall color, the peak of the fall color, is a little bit after these flowers will be done blooming. So you're not going to get quite that dazzling combination. But they are of they're of a scale and of similar growing conditions, so they all work nicely together. Okay, now we're getting into the solid fall, and I'm going to go for asters and grasses. So this is pink muley grass. This is a little bit later in the season, so it's not quite so pink anymore. But with that sort of misty morning, low angle fall light, very fluffy. And in this picture, it is with the smooth blue aster. This is at the top of the Piedmont habitat as well. So one of the, I love our fall purple asters so very much, but very few of them, unlike the aromatic aster really can hold its own. Most of the ones that actually grow around here are kind of floppier and sprawlier. So if you can grow it in combination with something like the hairgrass, which has a pretty consistent shape to it, they sort of play off each other, and you get a neater, more intentional look than just growing the asters by themselves. And not just the hairgrass, but pretty much any of our native warm season grasses will do this for you. So these are all really good. The large flowered American aster I like so much because the flowers are bigger and they're a really great purple. The clasping American aster is more floriferous, but you can see that it's right out here on Fordham on the bypass. It grows right around here. And then Eastern Silvery Aster I'm going to talk a little bit more about, but that one is smaller and much more upright. So if you're looking for well-behaved, the Eastern Silvery is a little bit more well-behaved. It's hard to see in here, but I put this in because it's pinker, so you believe me that really was pink muley grass. I swear. Okay, so here is the Eastern Silvery Aster with a different grass. This is split-beard bluestem. So these pictures are taken like if you're leaving the plant sale and walking across that big bridge across the bioretention. So the split-beard bluestem and pretty much any of the andropogons are very quiet at the beginning of the growing season, get going in the summer. So in late summer they're blooming, and this one has a lot of color when it's blooming, a lot of color. It's still a grass, but it's a bluey green with some pink and yellow, and then when it's done blooming, it gets better because it's called split-beard bluestem because of the very white, fluffy, feathery seeds. So those feathery seeds, when backlit by the low fall light, are just awesome. This really got squashed by the snow, but you can still see some of it up there now if you happen to walk out that way. And the seeds are still there, being fun even at the end of February. It works really nicely with the Eastern Silvery Aster because they're similar in form. They're both very sort of nice and narrow and upright. And the reason the Eastern Silvery Aster has that name is because of its foliage, which is pretty silvery. It's one of our easy to identify. The purple fall asters make people scratch their heads. They're like, okay, which one is that? But this one has small leaves that are pressed up against the stem and very silvery. So it sort of stands out on its own. In that bigger picture, you can sort of see at the top just a little bit of red, which is actually sourwood. But this is happening as things are really starting to get their fall color. And in the last spring, I think, we planted this Vaccinium fuscatum with it. So this is also really nice. I don't have a picture of all three of them together, but you can see the split-beard blue stem in these pictures. And this Vaccinium is nice this time of year because it's got little pink buds and it's got a nice architecture. It's a smaller shrub. So even though it's not really doing much, I find it very attractive this time of year. Soon it will be blooming. Its flowers are just little white urn-shaped blueberry-like flowers, and I think it's best in the fall because its fall color is so great and it goes on for a little bit. It's also a really good wildlife plant. The blueberries are black, so blackberries, but not blackberries, blueberries. So you can eat them, or the birds can eat them, or whoever else can eat them. Also, ericaceous shrubs like Vaccinium are really important plants for some of the specialist bees that rely on pollen from a very particular species or set of species. The specialist bees have a tendency, or some of them really rely on the Vaccinium, so it's a good thing to plant for bees as well. All right, another grass. This is definitely the part where I talk about grasses. This eastern needlegrass is really one of my favorites, and not just because I like to say Piptachedium avinaceum out loud a lot, but it is excellent in the landscape all the time. So the picture on the left is it in bloom. So when it's blooming, also dry shade. It's a great plant for dry shade. But when it's in bloom, the flowering stalks are very feathery and delicate. The plant itself is like not much more than 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall, but the flowering stalks are more like 4 feet tall. You can sort of see that there is a trumpet creeper flower hung up in them, so that little bit of yellow and orange is a trumpet creeper flower that has fallen from above and hung up in them. You can't expect that, but it's nice when it happens. And you can see a little bit of green and gold in the bottom left of that picture there. So another plant that works well in dry shade. So after they're finished flowering, there are like 5 minutes when the flowering stalks get a little bit ratty, and they're very easy to just like grab them at the base and snap them off and walk away. And then for the rest of the year, you have this very charming, fine-textured little clump of grass that's just there being lovely, maintenance-free, in dry shade. So everybody should be planting more of that. It grows in the Piedmont habitat. This is one of those things that I don't have anything to do with, it just happens, but with actually the Rubus trivialis, but Rubus flagellaris is the more common dewberry. So the dewberry is like a little trailing shrub, thorny. My hands are telling the tale right now, but sort of creeps around along the ground, so it blooms very low, which is really nice with the clumps of Piptachedium and in early spring. So I'm working on making this combination happen in more places. It's another one, the dewberry is another one of those good for wildlife plants, so good for biodiversity. This is my last grass picture, but little blue stem is another really great one. It, like the split-beard blue stem, is real quiet this time of year, but sort of in the late fall, when it gets to blooming, it's in its own subtle way colorful. This is just straight species, but at other places in the garden, like out here on the top deck, we have some of the cultivars. So the cultivars really range from like a red to blue and everything in between. Their seeds are definitely more delicate than the split-beard blue stem. Their foliage is more delicate. They're the most delicate of the, I want to call them andropogons. They're not andropogons anymore, but they're the most delicate of the blue stems. And they are just so excellent for winter interest, and also for providing habitat and sort of wind breaks for any kind of insects that are out and about in the winter. Some of the ground nesting bees like to make their nests at the base of these bunch grasses. Think it's like a little thatched roof of their own to keep the rain out of their little burrows. So it's really good wildlife plants. And then This goldenrod is another, it's not the latest blooming goldenrod, but people are sometimes afraid of goldenrods because they can be big and unmanageable and spread vegetatively, and there are actually quite a few of them that are small and showy and well behaved, and the Eastern Gray is one of my favorites. It's charming. And this combination is, as you cross that bioretention bridge, it's on the other side, over by the Blue Heron sculptures. Okay, I have not been looking at the time, but I've only got one more. So this was sort of like, okay, I need to put more shrubs in here because in the description I said I was going to do shrubs, and I wrote the description long before I put the talk together. So here is an arrowwood. I honestly can't tell because it's not in focus enough for me to remember whether or not this is downy arrowwood or smooth black haw, but they both bloom about the same time. The downy arrowwood is smaller, probably not much more than 6 or 7 feet tall, and it doesn't smell great when it blooms, so don't plant it too close to your kitchen window. But the smooth black haw also blooms pretty early in the season and is much taller, maybe more of a small tree. And the coral honeysuckle is our native honeysuckle, which is a great pollinator plant. I mean, it's a good hummingbird plant. I discovered when I saw it being defoliated last year that it is also a larval host plant for the hummingbird clearwing moth, which is one of those fun little moths that looks like a hummingbird. And you can grow coral honeysuckle up all kinds of things, but there's not going to be anything that's more charming than a viburnum in bloom. And this is one of those combinations that, this happens in the woods around here. This happens out in our parking lot where we planted neither of these species. So it's something that is like absolutely true to our area and really beneficial for all kinds of critters. The viburnums make fruits that are good for birds or whoever else wants to eat them. Maybe not us. So anyway, a really good combination. This picture is actually the slide that I used to start my gardening for biodiversity talk because it really gets to the nitty-gritty of that. So that is native plant combinations for y'all. And I think Joanna's going to help if people have questions.
Thank you. That was fabulous. So we have some time for questions. Who has some questions for this? Come over here, and then I'll head to this.
What do you suggest for deer resistance? Most of us don't have fences like here.
Yeah, that's a really hard question. One of the things that makes that question so hard is everyone's deer behave differently. And I did not go out of my way to put, deer tolerant plants into this talk, but I always say like the mountain mints or monardas, Baptisia, so some deer will eat Baptisia, some deer won't. There's definitely, deer are tricky. There is no easy answer to that one. Grow ferns, the grasses, they won't eat the grasses, so any of those grasses are really good picks. I think deciduous shrubs, if you've got deer problems, you're much better off planting deciduous shrubs than evergreen shrubs. But yeah, I mean, I've seen them eat everything. The milkweeds that, are supposed to be poison, the deer will eat those. Roses that are thorny, the deer will eat those. I live out in Chatham County where I have a lot of them. I was walking the dog this morning and I counted 6 pairs of eyes staring back at me. So I grow a lot of ferns and grasses. But yeah, sorry, I don't have a good one for that.
Another question over here. I thought I saw hands. Back here. Mary?
So a few years ago, right outside where the plant sale area is, around the walkway, you had silene and another white plant. It had a white ball to it.
I think that's probably the Barbara's buttons. Yeah, that was in.
White, not yellow.
Well, the Barbara's buttons was white.
Okay.
I mean, go back.
That was a great combination.
Yeah, I agree. There it is. So this guy right here is like a little, Barbara's buttons, it's a little round ball of white. I didn't talk very much about it, but this also blooms right out there with the fire pink. So when that blooms with the fire pink, I'm happy, as opposed to when the Enothera blooms with the fire pink, I'm unhappy. So yeah, that's a good combo.
Other questions? Y'all getting excited for the May plant sale?
Yeah, I'm pretty new to this area, so my question, and everybody else knows the answer, but how important is it if we live in a shady place with a lot of trees that drop their leaves in the winter, how important is it to blow the leaves off the flower beds?
It's another hard one. I try to, I garden a little bit differently at home than I do here. At home, I don't move anything. Those leaves are the habitat for all of the insects that were eating those leaves. And, if you leave them in place, they will break down. And, sort of leaf litter is the best kind of habitat for spring ephemerals and a lot of things. So my approach to gardening, I don't have if you listen to my bio, I have no horticulture background at all, even though that's what I do for a living. Leaving things in place as much as you can, having your garden act as much as a natural ecosystem does, is the best way to support biodiversity. If you're growing like bluets, you can see the little bluets that are blooming as you cross the bridge here, and they're this big, and they're a tiny little ground cover. And if you let them get covered up in leaves, they're going to get smothered. So, if it's something small that can't take the leaf litter, you try and move it around rather than get rid of it. And you can get rid of it if you want to, if you need to. I mean, everybody's got their own style. My style is leave as much of it as I can. I really have trouble this time of year when it gets to like all of that winter interest that was so excellent a few weeks back, now is about to be less than exceptional backdrop for all of the new green that's going to come up. So I jump through some crazy hoops to keep all of my old plant stems in place. I weave them together in fences and make funny little brush piles out of them. All in that as I'm striving to garden more like the way things go down in a natural area. So that was a lot of words. I don't know if you got anything out of that.
Great question, great answer. Thank you. Question over here.
This is actually more of a comment than a question, but the leaf litter is how the trees sequester their fall and winter nutrients. So if you leave them in place, you're a lot better off, in addition to the insects and stuff. The tree forests don't get fertilized. That's how they fertilize themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of us who were familiar with that notion and wanted to keep the leaves in place and not send them off to a landfill or have them transported around by fossil fuels would chop them up and put them back in the bed mulched. And now that I'm aware that those leaves are the habitat for all of the overwintering stages of the insects that were up in the trees, I do a whole lot less mulching now, which doesn't mean that I don't do it. But I try to limit my movement of leaves, my mulching of leaves to the places where I really feel like I have to or want to, and try to leave as much intact as I possibly can.
Thanks. Other questions? One back here.
It's not really a question, but I wonder, well, partly a question, how you feel about cultivars of some of the native plants.
So there's a lot of research on cultivars, and what it comes down to is some cultivars have great biodiversity value, maybe even more than the straight species, and some don't. I think it really depends on what your goal is. If you want a phlox that's a particular color, or that is mildew resistant, and this cultivar is doing what you want in that sense, then you should totally go for that. In terms of, preserving genetic diversity, in terms of providing the best resources for the critters, cultivars might not be the best answer, but I think that there's definitely a place for them in a garden. I am not strictly opposed to growing non-natives, as long as it's not an invasive exotic. If it makes you happy and you can still provide for, the insects by growing natives alongside, I say go for it. I'm not anti-cultivar.
Because I just wanted to say that there's a green and gold cultivar called Pierre that grows kind of flat to the ground, and that's about the only thing that deer haven't tried to eat in my
All right, because it's so flat it's hiding from them? Well, good. That's good information.
On your way.
As I understand it, one of the reasons for using plants that are native and not hybrids is that certain plants and insects evolve together, and certain insects can only survive with certain plants.
Yep, that's absolutely true. Mm-hmm.
There was another question over this way. Let's see. Sneak in front of you. So I'm fairly new to wildlife, wildflower gardening, and my beds look nothing like this. So my question is, do you fertilize them? What do you do to, I'm the kind of person that I get a wildflower, somebody gives me some seeds, I just throw it on the ground and hope, or dig a hole and put it in. But do I need to be adding amendments or adding different soil?
If your soil is really difficult, you might consider adding amendments, but the only thing that I consistently do is, either leave the leaf litter in place or mulch it and put it back. So those decomposing leaves or whatever else, whatever kind of organic matter you happen to have on hand will, just sort of add organic matter to your soil. We don't fertilize around here, at least not out in the landscapes. We don't need to. When we were creating the Piedmont habitat, we really, we were amending a lot of these soils with as much organic matter as we could, because we got, with this building, we wound up with some very weird soils that was left behind by the construction company. So we were amending, and there were plenty of beds where we went out of our way not to keep things as bare and mineral as we could, because a lot of the natives, if they're overfed and overwatered, they're just going to flop over. So if you can make it a little bit tougher for them, they're going to be more sturdy, more upright, better looking. So, there's a balance. It sort of depends on what you're starting with, but you don't need to be adding fertilizer to the soil just because.
Time for one more question. Minor, headed to you.
What is a good time to cut back eastern aromatic aster and frost aster to keep it from flopping over or getting too tall?
I guess the way I do it is when it starts flopping, I cut it back. I don't know, sort of midsummer, maybe? Yeah. Both of those things, as you prune on them, they'll keep coming along anyway. So, as long as you're not doing it like after, when they're in full bloom and you're going to lose all the flowers by cutting it back, I would say anytime. And sometimes they don't, sometimes they just act right and then you don't have to. Sometimes they don't act right.
Thank you for all your great questions. Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
So we'll be posting, for those interested in programs, by next Thursday, we'll have all of the Year of the Wildflower programs through August posted online.